The blood on Winifred Vaughn's hands wasn't hers, but she scrubbed them raw anyway, watching the water in the basin turn pink as the Wyoming sun beat through the kitchen window of the grand house where she'd served for 3 endless years. It was 1882, and she'd been nothing more than a shadow in the Pemberton household since she was 15, orphaned when cholera took her parents during their journey west. Mrs. Pemberton had taken her in, but charity came with a price. Winifred worked from dawn until well past dark, cleaning, cooking, mending, and enduring the sharp tongue of a woman who reminded her daily that she was lucky to have a roof over her head. At 18, Winifred had begun to accept that this was all life would ever offer her. She would scrub floors until her hands were gnarled, sleep in the cramped servants' quarters behind the kitchen, and fade away as quietly as she'd arrived. The blood had come from Mr. Pemberton's hunting trip. He'd returned with 3 dead rabbits that needed cleaning, and of course, the task fell to Winifred. She didn't mind the work itself. It was honest labor. What wore on her was the emptiness, the certainty that she would never be more than a pair of hands to serve others. "Girl, Mrs. Pemberton's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. "When you finish there, the carpets in the parlor need beating, and don't dawdle. We're expecting guests for supper." "Yes, madam," Winifred replied automatically, her voice soft and practiced in submission. She dried her hands on her apron and moved through the house with quiet efficiency. The Pemberton home was one of the finest in Jackson, Wyoming, a growing town nestled in the valley with the Teton Range rising majestically to the west. The house boasted real glass windows, imported furniture, and enough rooms that Winifred sometimes went days without entering some of them. As she hauled the heavy carpets outside to beat them, she caught sight of riders approaching down the main road. 3 men on horseback, moving with the easy confidence of those who spent more time in the saddle than on their feet. The lead rider sat tall on a paint horse, his broad-brimmed hat shading his face from the afternoon sun. Winifred didn't have time to wonder about strangers. She had work to do. She raised the carpet beater and brought it down with rhythmic precision, sending clouds of dust into the air. The physical labor felt good after the delicate work of preparing the rabbits. Here, she could put her frustration into each strike, imagining with each blow that she was beating away the chains of her circumstance. "Looks like you're fighting a battle with that carpet." The voice startled her so badly she nearly dropped the beater. She spun to find one of the riders had dismounted and stood just a few feet away, his horse's reins loose in his hand. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. A day's worth of stubble shadowed his jaw, and dust from the trail clung to his worn leather vest. "I apologize, sir," Winifred said quickly, lowering her gaze as she'd been taught. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll move around back if the dust is troubling you." "You're not disturbing anyone," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her glance up despite herself. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not pity, not contempt, but something that looked almost like recognition. "I'm Quincy Ashford. My men and I are here to see Mr. Pemberton about a cattle contract." "He's inside, sir. If you go to the front door, Mrs. Pemberton will receive you." Quincy Ashford tilted his head slightly, studying her in a way that made Winifred's cheeks warm. "What's your name?" she hesitated. Servants weren't usually asked their names by visiting gentlemen. They were part of the furniture, present but unremarked upon. "Winifred Vaughn, sir." "Miss Vaughn," he said, as if testing the sound of it. Then he smiled, and it transformed his entire face, softening the hard lines that outdoor life had carved into his features. "That's a fine name. My grandmother was named Winifred, Before she could respond, one of his companions called out, "Quincy, we haven't got all day." "Coming," Quincy replied, but he didn't immediately move. He looked at Winifred again, and this time she was certain she saw something in his expression. Interest, perhaps, or curiosity. "I hope we'll see each other again, Miss Vaughn." Then he was gone, striding toward the front of the house with his companions, leaving Winifred standing amid the dust and beaten carpets, her heart beating faster than it should. She told herself it meant nothing. Men like Quincy Ashford didn't truly see girls like her. He'd been polite, nothing more. She returned to her work with renewed vigor, trying to drive away the strange flutter in her chest. An hour later, she was in the kitchen preparing the evening meal when Mrs. Pemberton swept in, her face flushed with excitement. "Set 3 more places for supper, girl. Mr. Ashford and his men will be joining us." Winifred's hand stilled for just a moment before she continued chopping vegetables. "Yes, madam, and make sure you're presentable when you serve, Mrs." Pemberton added, eyeing Winifred's stained apron with distaste. "Mr. Ashford is an important man. He owns the second-largest ranch in the valley, and Mr. Pemberton is hoping to secure a very lucrative contract with him." The second-largest ranch. Winifred had heard talk of the Ashford spread, though she'd never paid much attention. Ranch owners came and went from the Pemberton house regularly, discussing business she had no part in. She changed her apron and smoothed her hair, catching a glimpse of herself in the small mirror near the wash basin. Brown eyes looked back at her, set in a face that was pretty enough but unremarkable. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her dress, though clean, had been mended so many times it was more patches than original fabric. When she carried the first course into the dining room, she kept her eyes down, moving with the practiced invisibility she'd perfected over 3 years. But she felt Quincy Ashford's gaze on her as she set the soup bowls on the table. "This looks delicious," he said, and though he addressed Mrs. Pemberton, Winifred knew the words were meant for her. "You must have an excellent cook." "Oh, the girl manages well enough, Mrs." Pemberton said dismissively. "Though she's had proper training under my supervision, of course." Winifred retreated to the kitchen, her face burning. She'd taught herself to cook from her mother's recipes, perfecting dishes through trial and error with no help from Mrs. Pemberton, who rarely set foot in the kitchen. Throughout the meal, she moved in and out, clearing plates and serving courses, and each time she entered the dining room, she felt Quincy's attention follow her. It was unnerving and thrilling all at once. "The cattle will be ready for transport by early October," Mr. Pemberton was saying. "That gives you time to prepare your herd for winter." "My foreman can bring the payment when we collect them," Quincy replied, "though I prefer to inspect the stock myself before we finalize anything." Of course. A man doesn't build a successful operation by being careless. As Winifred served the final course, a dried apple pie she'd made that morning, her hand trembled slightly. A drop of cream slid down the side of one plate, and she quickly tried to wipe it away with her cloth. "Leave it," Quincy said quietly, and when she looked up in surprise, he was watching her with those creek water eyes. "It's perfect as it is." She fled to the kitchen, her heart racing. What was happening? Why did this stranger's attention affect her so? The answer came later that evening after the guests had departed and she was washing the dinner dishes. Mrs. Pemberton appeared in the kitchen doorway, her expression calculating. "Mr. Ashford asked about you," she said without preamble. Winifred nearly dropped the plate she was holding. "Madam, don't play stupid, girl. He wanted to know your circumstances, whether you were bound to us by contract or debt." Mrs. Pemberton crossed her arms. "I told him you were an orphan we'd taken in out of Christian charity and that you worked here of your own free will." The words were technically true, but they twisted reality into something grotesque. Winifred had nowhere else to go and no means to leave. Her free will was as illusory as her freedom. "I see," Winifred managed. "He's coming back tomorrow," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "He wants to speak with you directly. Mr. Pemberton and I have discussed it, and we've decided to allow it. But understand this, Winifred. Men like Quincy Ashford don't marry girls like you. Whatever he's offering, it won't be respectable. If you bring shame on this household, you'll be turned out without a reference." The words struck like blows, each one landing with practiced cruelty. Mrs. Pemberton swept out, leaving Winifred alone with her thoughts and the greasy dishwater. She barely slept that night, lying on her narrow cot and staring at the ceiling. What could Quincy Ashford possibly want with her? Mrs. Pemberton's insinuation hung in the air like smoke. Perhaps he was like other wealthy men she'd heard about, men who kept mistresses in small houses and visited them when their wives weren't watching. The thought made her stomach turn. She'd spent 3 years guarding what little dignity she had left. She wouldn't surrender it now, no matter how kind Quincy's eyes had seemed, or how his attention had made her feel seen for the first time in years. Morning came too quickly. Winifred went through her routine with mechanical precision, building the fire, making breakfast, sweeping the floors. Every moment was weighted with anticipation and dread. Quincy arrived just after 10, riding alone this time. Winifred watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted and tied his horse to the post. He wore clean clothes today, his shirt pressed and his hat in his hand as he approached the door. Mrs. Pemberton intercepted Winifred before she could retreat to her quarters. "He's in the parlor. Go. Don't keep him waiting." Winifred's hands were shaking as she walked down the hallway. She paused outside the parlor door, took a deep breath, and entered. Quincy stood by the window, but he turned when she entered. In the morning light, he looked different, less like the dusty cowboy from yesterday and more like a proper gentleman, but his eyes held the same warmth. "Miss Vaughn," he said, "thank you for agreeing to see me." "I'm not sure I had much choice, Mr. Ashford," she replied, more honestly than she'd intended. His expression flickered with something, understanding perhaps or concern. "You always have a choice. If you want me to leave, I'll go right now." The offer seemed genuine, which only confused her more. "Why are you here?" He gestured to the settee. "Would you sit? This might take a few minutes." She perched on the edge of the cushion, her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. Quincy remained standing, as if trying to maintain some distance between them. "I'm going to be direct, because I don't believe in wasting time or misleading people," he began. "Yesterday, when I saw you working, something struck me. You looked so fierce, so determined, like you were fighting something bigger than dust in a carpet." He paused. "Then during dinner, I watched the way Mrs. Pemberton spoke to you, the way she dismissed your work even though that meal was the best I've had in months. I made some inquiries in town this morning about your situation." Winifred's cheeks burned. "You investigated me. I asked whether you were happy here, whether you stayed by choice." He met her gaze steadily. "The general consensus was that you had nowhere else to go and that the Pembertons treated you as little more than unpaid labor. That's not your concern, Mr. Ashford. Maybe it should be." He moved closer, not threateningly but earnestly. "I need someone at my ranch, not a servant, a partner. Someone who can manage the household, keep the books, handle the business side of things when I'm out with the cattle. My foreman's wife has been doing it, but she's expecting their 3rd child, and she needs to focus on her family." Winifred stared at him. "You want to hire me?" "I want to offer you a position, yes. You'd have your own room in the main house, a fair wage and autonomy over how you run things. You'd take your meals with me and the other ranch hands, not separately. You'd be treated as an equal member of the operation. It sounded too good to be true. Winifred had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed generous. Why me? You don't know me. I know you're smart enough to teach yourself to cook like that. I know you're strong enough to do work that should be done by two people, and I know you deserve better than this. He gestured around the parlor, encompassing the whole house and the life she led within it. Mrs. Pemberton said. Winifred hesitated, then forced herself to continue. She implied your offer might be dishonorable. Quincy's face darkened with anger, but she could tell it wasn't directed at her. Mrs. Pemberton has a vicious mind. I'm offering you honest work for honest pay, Miss Vaughn. Nothing more, nothing less. You'd have my protection and my respect. Any man on my ranch who treated you otherwise would find himself looking for work elsewhere. Winifred wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately it frightened her. I have nothing to offer in return. No skills beyond cooking and cleaning. I can barely raid. Then we'll teach you. My foreman's wife, Mary, is a school teacher from back east. She'd be happy to help. Quincy's voice softened. Everyone deserves a chance to be more than they were, Miss Vaughn. I'm offering you that chance. She looked down at her hands, work worn and scarred from 3 years of labor. Could she really leave? Could she trust this man she'd known for less than a day? How much time do I have to decide? She asked quietly. As much as you need, but I'll be honest with you. I'm leaving Jackson in 3 days to return to my ranch. If you want to come, you'd need to be ready by then. 3 days. It felt like no time at all and an eternity simultaneously. Quincy must have read her hesitation because he added, Come visit the ranch tomorrow. See it for yourself. Meet Mary and the others. Make your decision based on reality, not promises. I'll send a wagon for you at 8 in the morning if you're willing. That seemed fair. More than fair. All right, Winifred said. I'll come tomorrow. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Good, I'll see you then, Miss Vaughn. After he left, Mrs. Pemberton swept into the parlor, her expression sharp with curiosity. Well, what did he want? He offered me a position at his ranch, Winifred said carefully. Managing his household. Mrs. Pemberton's laugh was brittle. And you think that's all it is? You silly girl. He'll have you warming his bed within a week, and when he's tired of you, you'll be cast out with nothing. He offered me wages and my own room. They all make promises, Winifred. Men like Quincy Ashford take what they want and discard the rest. Mrs. Pemberton's voice took on a poisonous sweetness. But if you want to throw away the security we've provided you, the roof over your head and the food in your belly, then go ahead. Just don't come crawling back when reality sets in. Winifred spent the rest of the day in turmoil. She performed her duties mechanically while her mind spun in circles. Was Mrs. Pemberton right? Was she being naive? But then she remembered the way Quincy had looked at her. Not with lust or calculation, but with genuine interest, as if she were a person worth knowing rather than a pair of hands to serve him. She decided to go to the ranch. Even if she ultimately said no, she deserved to see what other possibilities existed in the world. The wagon arrived promptly at 8 the next morning. The driver was a weather-beaten man in his 40s who introduced himself as Pete, the ranch foreman. His face creased into a smile when he saw her. So you're Miss Vaughn, he said. Boss told me to come fetch you. Says you might be interested in Mary's old position. I'm just looking, Winifred said carefully as she climbed onto the wagon seat. Looking's a good start. Pete clicked his tongue at the horses, and they lurched into motion. My Mary's been running herself ragged trying to manage the house and the babies. She'll be mighty relieved if you take the job. The ride took nearly 2 hours, following the main road north, before turning onto a track that wound through open grassland. The Teton Range loomed larger with every mile, their peaks still snow-capped even in August. The land here was vast and beautiful in a way that made Winifred's chest ache. She'd spent 3 years looking at the same walls, the same street outside the Pemberton house. She'd forgotten how big the world was. The Ashford ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant cluster of buildings, then resolving into a proper homestead as they drew closer. The main house was a 2-story log structure with a wide porch running along the front. It wasn't as grand as the Pemberton home, but it was solid and well-maintained, with glass windows that caught the morning sun. Beyond it, she could see a barn, corrals, a bunkhouse, and various outbuildings. Quincy emerged from the barn as they pulled up, brushing dust from his hands. He wore work clothes today, practical and worn, and Winifred realized this was who he really was. Not the cleaned-up gentleman who'd visited the Pemberton parlor, but a working rancher who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. "Miss Vaughn," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "Welcome to the Double A." "Double A?" she asked. "Ashford's Acres," he explained with a slightly embarrassed grin. "Not very original, but it works. Come on, I'll show you around." He led her first to the house. The interior was spacious and surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's establishment. The main room served as both parlor and dining area, with a large stone fireplace at one end. The furniture was simple but well made, and the floor was clean swept. "Kitchen's through here," Quincy said, pushing open a door. The kitchen was better equipped than the one at the Pembertons. A large cast-iron stove dominated one wall, and shelves held an impressive array of pots, pans, and dishes. A window over the dry sink looked out toward the mountains. "This would be your domain," Quincy said. "Well, yours and Mary's until she's ready to fully hand it over. She'll train you on the bookkeeping and the accounts. We feed the ranch hands 3 meals a day, but Mary's set up a system that makes it manageable. The men take turns helping with dishes and such." "The men help." Winifred couldn't hide her surprise. "Everyone pulls their weight here," Quincy said simply. "No one's too good for any job that needs doing." He led her up a narrow staircase. "There are 4 bedrooms up here. Mine's at the end. The one next to it would be yours. The other 2 are for guests, though we rarely have any." He opened a door, revealing a room that was easily 3 times the size of her closet at the Pembertons. A real bed with a frame stood against one wall, covered with a quilt. A dresser, a small table and chair, and even a mirror completed the furnishings. The window overlooked the front pasture where horses grazed peacefully. "It's not fancy," Quincy said, "but it's yours if you want it. You can decorate however you like, bring in whatever you need." Winifred walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. She could see for miles from here. No walls hemming her in, no locked doors to remind her of her place. Just open sky and endless possibility. "I'd like to meet Mary," she said quietly. Quincy's face brightened. "Of course. She's at her cabin. It's not far." They walked across the ranch yard, and Winifred noticed the men working. They nodded respectfully to Quincy and to her, their greetings genuine rather than the stiff formality she was used to. At the corrals, a young man was working with a spirited horse, speaking to it in low, soothing tones. "That's Daniel," Quincy said. "He's got a gift with horses. Gentle but firm, never breaks their spirit." The comment seemed to hold deeper meaning, but before Winifred could puzzle it out, they'd arrived at a small but neat cabin. A woman answered Quincy's knock, a toddler balanced on her hip and another clinging to her skirts. She looked exhausted but smiled when she saw them. "You must be Winifred," she said warmly. "I'm Mary. Please come in. Excuse the mess. The children have decided that neatness is optional today." The cabin's interior was cheerfully chaotic. Toys were scattered across the floor, and laundry hung on a line strung near the stove. But underneath the temporary disorder, Winifred could see a comfortable home filled with love. "Let me make tea," Mary said, settling the toddler in a high chair. "Quincy, could you keep an eye on Jacob? He's discovered he can climb." "Sure thing." Quincy scooped up the little boy who'd been trying to scale a bookshelf and set him down with a pile of wooden blocks. As Mary prepared tea, she talked. "I've been managing the main house for 3 years since Pete and I arrived. It's good work, and Quincy's been more than fair. But with another baby coming and these two running wild, I just can't manage anymore." She poured hot water over tea leaves. "If you take the position, I'll teach you everything. The accounts, the supply orders, the meal planning. It's not difficult once you understand the system." "What's he like to work for?" Winifred asked quietly. Mary's expression turned thoughtful. "Honest, fair. He's got a temper sometimes, but he never takes it out on people who don't deserve it. He works as hard as any ranch hand and he expects the same from everyone. But he also knows when someone needs help, and he's never too proud to give it." She paused. "He's lonely, though. Been running this place by himself since his father died 2 years ago. I worry about him sometimes." Quincy had moved to the window with Jacob, pointing out horses in the pasture and naming them. The little boy giggled, and Quincy's face softened in a way that made Winifred's heart do something complicated. "He seems like a good man," Winifred said. "He is," Mary confirmed. "I wouldn't recommend you come here if he wasn't. Lord knows there are enough places in this world where women get taken advantage of. This isn't one of them." After tea, Quincy showed Winifred the rest of the ranch. The barn, clean and organized, smelling of hay and horses. The chicken coop where plump hens scratched in the dirt. The smokehouse, the root cellar, the workshop where repairs were made. Each building was well maintained, evidence of careful stewardship. "How big is the ranch?" Winifred asked as they walked. 5,000 acres, give or take. "We run about 500 head of cattle, plus horses for ranch use and some for sale. It's a good size. Not the biggest operation in Wyoming, but substantial enough." He glanced at her. "Pete manages the day-to-day operations with the cattle. I handle the business end, buying and selling, contracts, that sort of thing. Mary's been keeping the books and making sure we don't go broke feeding everyone. If you took over, you'd work with both of us." "How many people live here?" 8 ranch hands in the bunkhouse, Pete and Mary in their cabin and me in the main house. Everyone eats together in the main house, though. We're a family here, more or less." Family. The word resonated with Winifred. She'd been without family for 3 years, and before that, it had been just her and her parents struggling to make their way west. They returned to the main house, and Quincy led her to a small office off the main room. A desk held neat stacks of papers, a ledger, and an inkwell. "This is where the bookkeeping happens. Mary can show you how to keep the accounts. It's mostly addition and subtraction, recording purchases and sales." Winifred bit her lip. "I told you I can barely read. And I told you we'd teach you." Quincy's voice was gentle. Mary was a school teacher in Philadelphia before she married Pete. She's been teaching some of the ranch hands to read in the evenings. She'd be happy to help you too. The offer was overwhelming. Not just work, but education. The chance to become more than she was. "Why are you doing this?" Winifred asked suddenly. "You don't know me. I could be lazy or dishonest or completely incompetent." Quincy leaned against the desk, his expression serious. "Want to know something? 3 years ago, I was working for my father, and he was a hard man. He believed people had their places, and it was important to keep them there. Ranch hands were beneath him. Women were for cooking and bearing children. He ran this place like a tyrant, and everyone who worked here was miserable." He pushed off from the desk, pacing to the window. "When he died, I inherited everything. I could have run it the same way, but I remembered what it felt like to be dismissed, to have your work undervalued. I decided things would be different. Everyone who works here gets treated with respect. Everyone gets a fair wage and honest dealing. He turned back to her. When I saw you yesterday, I recognized something. Someone who'd been pushed down so long they'd almost forgotten they could stand up. I've seen it before and I can't walk away from it. Winifred felt tears prickling at her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. Come back tomorrow if you want to see more. Talk to the ranch hands, get their perspective. Make your decision based on everything, not just my word. I don't need another day, Winifred heard herself say. I'll take the position. Quincy's face transformed with a smile. Yes. The certainty settled into her bones. This was right. This was the change she'd been too afraid to even hope for. When would I start? Can you be ready to leave Jackson the day after tomorrow? We'll send the wagon for you. Bring whatever you have. If you need anything else, we'll get it. I don't have much, Winifred admitted. Just some clothes and a few personal items. That's fine. We'll make sure you have what you need. They shook hands on it, and Winifred felt the calluses on Quincy's palm, the firm grip of someone who kept his word. For the first time in 3 years, she felt hope unfurling in her chest like a flower turning toward the sun. The ride back to Jackson felt both too short and interminable. Her mind raced with everything that would need to happen in the next 2 days. She'd have to tell the Pembertons, pack her few belongings, prepare to leave the only life she'd known since her parents died. When Pete dropped her at the Pemberton house, Mrs. Pemberton was waiting on the porch, her face sharp with displeasure. Well, she demanded, did you see enough to realize what kind of trap you were walking into? Winifred straightened her spine, feeling something shifting inside her. I saw a ranch where people are treated with respect, where work is valued and fairly compensated. I've accepted Mr. Ashford's offer. I'll be leaving the day after tomorrow. Mrs. Pemberton's face flushed an ugly red. You ungrateful girl, after everything we've done for you. You've taken 3 years of my labor in exchange for a closet and table scraps, Winifred said, surprised by her own boldness. I'm grateful you didn't turn me out when my parents died, but I've more than repaid that debt. You'll regret this, Mrs. Pemberton hissed. When Quincy Ashford is done with you, you'll have nowhere to go. Then I'll find somewhere, Winifred replied, but I won't stay here anymore. She walked past Mrs. Pemberton into the house, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She'd made her choice and there was no going back. The next day crawled by. Mrs. Pemberton alternated between cold silence and cutting remarks. Mr. Pemberton tried to convince Winifred she was making a mistake, but his words lacked conviction. She suspected he'd already calculated the cost of finding another servant, and decided it wasn't worth the fight. Winifred packed her belongings that evening. They fit into a single small trunk. 2 spare dresses, some undergarments, a winter shawl her mother had made, and a tintype photograph of her parents taken just before they left Missouri. Looking at it now, she hoped they would have approved of her choice. She slept fitfully that night, excitement and anxiety warring for dominance. When dawn came, she dressed in her best dress, a dark blue cotton that had only been mended once, and waited by the kitchen door. The wagon arrived at 8, with Pete at the reins again. He helped her load her trunk and handed her up onto the seat. Ready? He asked. Yes, Winifred said, and this time she meant it without reservation. As they pulled away, she didn't look back at the Pemberton house. That part of her life was over. The journey to the ranch felt different this time. The landscape seemed brighter, more alive. Pete kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling her about the ranch hands she'd be meeting, sharing stories about life on the AA. His warmth helped ease her nerves. When they arrived, Quincy was waiting on the porch. He came down the steps as Pete helped Winifred down from the wagon. "Welcome home," Quincy said, and the words resonated through Winifred like a bell. Home. She'd been homeless for so long she'd forgotten what the word really meant. Mary appeared from the house, a basket over her arm. "Come on, I'll help you get settled. Then we can start going over the household routine." The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Mary was a patient teacher, showing Winifred where supplies were kept, how to plan meals for 10 hungry men, how to stretch the budget without sacrificing quality. The bookkeeping was more daunting, but Mary broke it down into manageable pieces. "You're a quick learner," Mary said one afternoon as they reviewed the accounts. "Much quicker than I expected." "I want to do well," Winifred admitted. "Everyone here has been so kind, I don't want to disappoint anyone." "You won't," Mary assured her. "Just be yourself. That's enough." The ranch hands were a diverse group. Besides Pete, there was Daniel, the young horse trainer she'd seen on her first visit. Then there were the Thompson brothers, Sam and Henry, who'd worked cattle all their lives. Old Tom, who'd been with the ranch since Quincy's grandfather's time. Miguel, a quiet Mexican man who was the best roper anyone had ever seen. And 3 others, all good men who treated Winifred with respect from day one. Quincy kept his distance initially, giving her space to settle in. But Winifred saw him everywhere, working alongside his men, making repairs, checking on the cattle. He never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself, and she noticed how the ranch hands respected him for it. Meals were communal affairs around the long table in the main room. Conversation flowed easily, full of jokes and friendly arguments about the best way to handle this or that ranch problem. Winifred found herself laughing more in those first few days than she had in 3 years. One evening, about a week after her arrival, Quincy found her on the porch after supper. She'd been watching the sun set over the Tetons, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, settling into the chair beside hers. "I'd forgotten how beautiful things could be," Winifred replied. "In town, you forget to look up. There's always another task, another demand. You seem to be settling in well. Mary says you're taking to the bookkeeping like a natural. She's been very patient with me." Winifred glanced at him. "Everyone has been. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." "What do you mean?" "I mean this all seems too good to be true. Good work, fair treatment, people who actually see me as a person rather than a servant." She twisted her hands in her lap. "Mrs. Pemberton said you'd have me warming your bed within a week." Quincy's jaw tightened. "That woman has a cruel tongue." "She was just warning me about the ways of the world." "The world doesn't have to be that way," Quincy said firmly. "And I meant what I told you. You have my respect and my protection, nothing more and nothing less. If I've ever done anything to make you uncomfortable, I apologize." "No," Winifred said quickly. "You've been nothing but honorable. I just wanted you to know what I'd been told in case." She trailed off, not sure how to finish. In case what? In case she'd misread his intentions. In case she'd hoped for something that wasn't there. Quincy was quiet for a moment, watching the dying light. "I lost someone," he said finally. 3 years ago, her name was Catherine. We were engaged to be married." Winifred's heart clenched. "What happened?" "Influenza. It swept through Jackson one winter, took a lot of people. She was one of them." His voice was steady but pained. "After she died, I threw myself into the ranch. I didn't want to feel anything, didn't want to think about what I'd lost. I just worked until I was too exhausted to remember." "I'm sorry," Winifred said softly. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. When I brought you here, it wasn't because I had some ulterior motive. It was because you deserved better and I could offer it. Nothing more." He turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the fading light. But I also want you to know that I'm glad you're here. Not just because you're good at the work, but because you're you. The ranch feels different with you in it. Lighter somehow. Winifred's breath caught. Quincy. You don't have to say anything, he said quickly. I just wanted you to know. No pressure, no expectations. Just the truth. He stood and went back inside, leaving Winifred alone with her racing thoughts and the last rays of sunset. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Not overtly, but in small ways. Quincy started lingering after meals to help her with dishes, their conversation flowing easily. He taught her to ride, patient with her inexperience, and she discovered a love for the freedom of moving across open land on horseback. She began helping him with correspondence, her reading improving rapidly under Mary's tutelage, and found she had a knack for translating his rough ideas into polished letters. They became partners in a way that went beyond her role as household manager. Quincy sought her opinion on decisions, from what supplies to order to whether they should expand the cattle operation. He treated her insights as valuable, never dismissing her thoughts just because she was new to ranch life. One afternoon in late September, Winifred was working in the garden Mary had planted, harvesting the last of the vegetables before the first frost. Quincy found her there, dirt on her hands and perspiration on her brow despite the cooling weather. Need any help? He asked. I could use another pair of hands with these squash, Winifred admitted. They're heavier than they look. They worked side by side, filling baskets with the harvest. The comfortable silence between them felt natural now, easy. I've been thinking, Quincy said after a while. Winter's coming and I'm going to need to make a trip to Cheyenne for supplies. It's a 3-day ride each way plus time in the city. I was wondering if you'd like to come along. Winifred sat back on her heels, surprised. Me? You should see how the purchasing is done, get a feel for the vendors we work with. And, he added with a slight smile, you might enjoy seeing the city. It's a lot bigger than Jackson. The thought was exciting and terrifying in equal measure. What about the ranch? Pete and Mary can manage for a week. We take the wagon, leave next Monday if the weather holds. All right, Winifred said. I'd like that. The journey to Cheyenne was an adventure. They camped under the stars the first night, and Quincy taught Winifred how to build a proper campfire. The second night, they stayed at a way station where the proprietor's wife took one look at them and assumed they were married. Neither corrected her, and they were given a single room with 2 narrow beds. Winifred lay awake long into the night, hyper-aware of Quincy's presence just feet away. Cheyenne was overwhelming. Buildings crowded together, people everywhere, the noise and bustle unlike anything Winifred had experienced. She stayed close to Quincy as they navigated the streets, visiting suppliers for feed, tools, and dry goods. At one shop, the proprietor tried to overcharge them, clearly thinking Quincy was a rube from the country. Winifred, who'd been studying the price lists Mary had given her, spoke up. That's 30% higher than your advertised price, she said firmly. We'll pay the correct amount or take our business elsewhere. The proprietor blinked, then had the grace to look embarrassed. My mistake, madam. The correct price, of course. Outside, Quincy laughed. That was impressive. Remind me never to try cheating you at cards. Mary's been teaching me more than bookkeeping, Winifred said, pleased with herself. That evening, Quincy took her to a restaurant, a real one with tablecloths and multiple courses. Winifred felt out of place in her simple dress surrounded by well-dressed city folk, but Quincy seemed oblivious to the disparity. You deserve a nice meal after all the work you've been doing, he said. Order whatever you like. Over dinner, he told her about his childhood, growing up on the ranch under his father's harsh rule. I used to dream about running away, he admitted. Just getting on a horse and riding until I found someplace where I could be myself. But then my mother got sick and I couldn't leave her alone with him. After she died, I stayed because I knew if I left, he'd take his anger out on the ranch hands. They needed someone to shield them. That must have been hard, Winifred said. It taught me what kind of man I didn't want to be. Quincy's eyes held hers across the table. When he died and I inherited everything, I promised myself I'd do things differently, that no one under my roof would ever feel small or worthless. You've kept that promise, Winifred said softly. I had a good reason to. His hand moved across the table, not quite touching hers but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his skin. Winifred, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. What? These past few months with you at the ranch, they've been the best I've had in years. You fit into the life there like you were always meant to be part of it. But more than that, I find myself looking for excuses to be near you, to talk to you, to see you smile. He paused, as if gathering courage. I know I said there were no expectations, and I meant it. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel something more. Winifred's breath came short. Quincy, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight. I just wanted you to know where I stand. His eyes were earnest. Take whatever time you need to think about it. Nothing changes unless you want it to. They finished the meal in a charged silence, and later, in the hotel room with its 2 narrow beds, Winifred lay awake again. But this time it was because her mind was whirling with possibility. She'd come to care for Quincy over these months. How could she not? He was everything she'd never dared to hope for in a man. Kind, honorable, hardworking, and he saw her as an equal. But the step from friendship and partnership to something more felt enormous. What if it didn't work? What if she disappointed him? What if she wasn't enough? On the journey back to the ranch, they fell into their easy partnership again, but there was a new undercurrent to every interaction. When Quincy helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingered at her waist. When she handed him coffee in the morning, their fingers brushed and held for a heartbeat longer than necessary. They arrived back at the ranch on a crisp October evening. Mary waddled out to greet them, her pregnancy now quite evident. Thank goodness you're back, she said. This baby seems determined to arrive early, and I want to hand over the last of the household management before that happens. The next few days were busy with settling back into routine and finalizing Mary's training. Winifred took over the accounts completely, meal planning and supply management. She felt confident now in ways she never had at the Pembertons, secure in her abilities and her place. One afternoon, she was working in the office when Quincy appeared in the doorway. Got a minute, of course. She set down her pen. He came in and closed the door behind him, which was unusual. I wanted to talk about what I said in Cheyenne. I've been thinking about it, Winifred said carefully, and she stood, coming around the desk to face him. I'm scared, she admitted. I've spent so long just trying to survive that I don't know how to hope for more, but you make me want to try. Quincy's face transformed. Yes, she took a breath. I care about you, Quincy. These past months you've shown me what it means to be treated with respect, to be valued. You've given me a life I never thought I'd have, and somewhere along the way I started to fall in love with you. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. Say that again. I love you, Winifred whispered. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd imagined a first kiss might be. It was gentle and fierce all at once, full of months of restrained feeling finally released. His lips were warm against hers, and she melted into him, her hands gripping his shoulders. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quincy pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too. I have for months, but I didn't want to pressure you. I needed time to believe it was real, Winifred said, that you really saw me as an equal. More than equal. You're everything. He kissed her again, softer this time, Marry me, Winifred. Be my partner in truth, not just in practice." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you." They told the ranch hands at dinner that night, and the room erupted in cheers. Mary cried happy tears, and Pete slapped Quincy on the back hard enough to make him stumble. "About time, boss," old Tom said with a grin. "We've been placing bets on when you'd finally work up the nerve." "You've been betting on us?" Winifred asked, torn between embarrassment and amusement. "Had to make the evenings interesting somehow," Daniel said. "I had money on October, so thank you for that." The wedding was planned for November, after the fall cattle sale was complete. They'd marry in Jackson, at the small church there, with the ranch hands and a few townspeople in attendance. Mary went into labor 2 weeks before the wedding, delivering a healthy baby girl they named Rose. Winifred helped during the delivery, discovering reserves of calm she hadn't known she possessed. Holding the tiny infant afterward, she felt something shift inside her. This could be her future. Children of her own, a family built on love rather than obligation. The wedding day arrived with fresh snow dusting the Tetons. Winifred wore a dress Mary had helped her sew, a soft cream wool with pearl buttons. It was simple but beautiful, and when she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the confident woman staring back. The ceremony was small and heartfelt. Quincy's hand shook slightly as he slipped a gold band onto her finger, and his eyes were suspiciously bright as they recited their vows. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Quincy kissed her like a man who'd found his way home after a long journey. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn since snow threatened. Someone had brought a fiddle, and there was dancing and laughter late into the night. Winifred danced with Quincy, with Pete, with each of the ranch hands who'd become her family. Later, when they finally retired to the main house, now truly their house, Quincy carried her over the threshold with exaggerated ceremony that made her laugh. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," he said, setting her down gently. "It's been home for a while now," Winifred replied. "But this makes it official." Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Quincy was patient with her inexperience, and she discovered that physical love could be an expression of the emotional bond they'd built over months of partnership and friendship. Afterward, lying in his arms, she felt a completeness she'd never imagined possible. Winter settled over the ranch, bringing snow and cold that kept everyone close to the house. Winifred thrived in her role as Quincy's wife. She managed the household with confidence, kept the books balanced, and became an integral part of every decision about the ranch's future. She also continued her education. Mary, despite having a newborn, still found time to help Winifred with reading and writing. By spring, Winifred could read the newspaper and write letters without assistance. She felt her world expanding with every new skill acquired. The ranch hands treated her marriage to Quincy as a natural evolution of what had been obvious to everyone. Her status didn't change from their perspective, because Quincy had always treated her as his equal. Now it was simply official. One evening in January, Winifred was helping Quincy with the accounts when he set down his pen and looked at her thoughtfully. "What?" she asked, smiling at his expression. "I was just thinking about the first time I saw you, beating that carpet like it had personally offended you." "I was taking out my frustrations on it," Winifred admitted. "I felt so trapped. I knew I had to do something." "Pete thought I was crazy, riding back to the Pembertons the very next day to talk to you. You never told me that. Pete said I was being impulsive, that I didn't know anything about you, but I couldn't get you out of my head. The way you looked so strong and so vulnerable at the same time." He reached across the desk to take her hand. "I'd planned to just offer you a job, But somewhere between seeing you that first time and talking to you in the Pemberton parlor, I started to fall for you." Winifred felt tears prick her eyes. "I thought you were too good to be true, Mrs. Pemberton had me half convinced you were going to take advantage of me. I know. That's why I made sure to give you space, to let you see for yourself what kind of man I was." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made bringing you here." "Best decision I ever made, saying yes," Winifred replied. Spring brought new life to the ranch. Calves were born, and Winifred found herself helping with difficult deliveries alongside Quincy and the ranch hands. The physical work was demanding, but she loved being part of the ranch's rhythms. In April, Winifred began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Quincy, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. When she finally confirmed it with the doctor in Jackson, she rode home with her heart singing. She told Quincy that evening on the porch, their favorite place for important conversations. "I have news." "Good news?" he asked, setting down the harness he'd been mending. "Very good news. We're going to have a baby." Quincy's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, wonder, and finally pure elation. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "Are you sure? When? Are you feeling all right? Do you need to sit down?" Winifred laughed at his sudden overprotectiveness. "I'm sure. The baby should arrive in November, and I'm feeling fine, just a little tired sometimes. You should rest more. Let me take over some of your duties. Quincy, I'm pregnant, not an invalid." Women have been doing this for thousands of years while still living their lives. But she couldn't deny his concern was touching. Over the following months, he was attentive without being smothering, making sure she didn't overdo things while still respecting her desire to remain active in ranch management. Mary was thrilled, immediately offering advice and loaning Winifred books about pregnancy and childbirth. The two women had become close friends, and Mary's experience was invaluable. As summer progressed and Winifred's belly swelled, she felt a contentment she'd never known. This was her family, her home, her life. The girl who'd scrubbed floors at the Pembertons felt like someone from another lifetime. One hot August afternoon, Winifred was in the kitchen making preserves from the wild berries the ranch hands had collected. Quincy came in, dusty from a day working with the cattle, and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her pregnant belly. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked, kissing her neck. "Your two favorite people are hot and sticky and covered in berry juice," Winifred replied, but she leaned back into his embrace. "Sounds perfect to me." He turned her gently to face him. "I was thinking, after the baby comes, maybe we should add on to the house. Another bedroom, maybe two. In case this baby wants siblings." "Already planning for more," Winifred teased. "I like the idea of a big family, but only if you do." "I do," she said softly. "I spent so much of my life alone. I'd love for our children to grow up surrounded by brothers and sisters." Their son was born on a cold November night during the first snowstorm of the season. The labor was long and difficult, but Mary and the doctor from Jackson saw Winifred through it. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Quincy was there to cut the cord with shaking hands. "A boy," the doctor announced, wrapping the infant in a blanket. Quincy held his son with such tenderness that Winifred, exhausted as she was, felt tears streaming down her face. "He's perfect," Quincy whispered. "You're perfect, thank you." They named him Thomas Quincy Ashford, after old Tom, who'd become a grandfather figure to them both. Tom himself cried when they told him, not ashamed of his tears. The ranch welcomed baby Thomas with enthusiasm. The hands took turns whittling him toys, and Mary donated all of Rose's outgrown baby clothes. Winifred marveled at how seamlessly her son was absorbed into their extended family. Motherhood came naturally to her, perhaps because she approached it the way she approached everything else, with determination and love. Quincy was a devoted father, walking the floors with Thomas when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with unconcealed wonder. The years that followed were full and rich. A daughter, Catherine, arrived 2 years after Thomas, named for the fiancé Quincy had lost. Then another son, James, 2 years after that. The house was expanded as planned, and the sounds of children's laughter filled what had once been a bachelor's lonely homestead. Winifred continued to manage the household and help with the ranch accounts, though Mary returned part-time to assist once her own children were older. The double prospered under Quincy's management and became known throughout Wyoming as a well-run operation where workers were treated fairly. One spring evening, with Thomas now 5 and helping his father with the horses, Catherine learning to read with Mary's help, and baby James napping in his cradle, Winifred stood on the porch and looked out over the ranch that had become her world. Quincy found her there, as he so often did, and slipped an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far I've come," she replied. 7 years ago I was scrubbing floors and believing that was all I'd ever be. Now look at me. A wife, a mother, a partner in a successful ranch. It feels like a dream sometimes." "It's real," Quincy assured her. "And you made it real through your strength and courage. I just gave you the opportunity." "You gave me everything," Winifred corrected. "You saw me when I was invisible. You made me your equal when I expected to be a servant forever." "You were always my equal," Quincy said. "I just had the good sense to recognize it." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the Tetons in shades of gold and rose. In the corral, Thomas was giggling at something his father had said earlier, before Quincy came to find Winifred. From inside the house came Catherine's voice as she practiced reading aloud to Mary. "You ever regret it?" Winifred asked quietly. "Marrying someone with no family, no connections, no dowry." Quincy turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I regret nothing. You brought life back to this ranch and to me. You're the smartest, strongest, most capable woman I've ever known. Our children are lucky to have you as a mother, and I'm lucky to have you as a wife." "I love you," Winifred said, the words as true now as the first time she'd spoken them. "I love you too. Always." As the sun set on another day, Winifred reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From orphan to servant to partner to wife and mother. Every step had been necessary, even the hard ones, because they'd led her to this moment, this life, this love. She thought about the girl she'd been, scrubbing that carpet in Jackson with hopeless fury. If she could speak to that girl now, she'd tell her to hold on just a little longer. That salvation could come from unexpected places, wearing dusty chaps and a kind smile. That being seen as an equal could change everything, that she was worth more than she knew. Years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew into a serious boy who loved working with the horses, showing his father's patience and his mother's determination. Catherine was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading everything she could get her hands on. James was still young but already showing signs of the charm that would serve him well in life. A 4th child arrived when Winifred was 32, another daughter they named Mary after their dear friend. Old Tom passed away peacefully in his sleep that same year, and they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he'd loved. The loss was felt deeply by everyone, but especially by Quincy and Winifred, who'd valued his wisdom and friendship. Pete eventually retired from active foreman duties, though he and Mary stayed on the ranch in their cabin. His oldest son took over his responsibilities, continuing the tradition of capable management. The ranch continued to prosper. Quincy made wise decisions about expansion and investment, always consulting Winifred before making major choices. Their partnership, forged in those first months of her employment, remained the foundation of everything they built. When Winifred turned 35, Quincy surprised her with a trip back to Missouri, to the town where she'd been born. They traveled by train now, a luxury unthinkable in her youth. She showed him the house where she'd grown up, now occupied by another family. They visited her parents' graves in the church cemetery, and Winifred told them about the life she'd built, hoping somehow they could hear. "They'd be proud of you," Quincy said, his arm around her waist as they stood before the simple headstones. "I hope so," Winifred replied. "They wanted so much for me. A good life, a loving family. I have that now, thanks to you." "Thanks to us," Quincy corrected. "We built this together." On the train home, Winifred watched the landscape roll past and marveled at how much the world had changed, and how much she'd changed with it. By the time she was 40, all 4 children were growing into remarkable young people. Thomas was 18, practically running the horse training operation. Catherine, at 16, had aspirations of becoming a teacher like Mary had been. James, at 14, was already showing a talent for the business side of ranching, poring over the account books with the same intensity Winifred had once brought to learning them. And young Mary, at 8, was the ranch's darling, spoiled by everyone, but somehow still sweet-natured. Winifred's hair held streaks of silver now, and Quincy's temples had gone completely gray. But they were still active and healthy, still partners in every sense of the word. One evening, after supper with the whole family gathered around the expanded table, Winifred and Quincy took their customary walk around the ranch. It was something they tried to do every evening when weather permitted, a chance to talk privately and reconnect after busy days. "Thomas asked me about taking over the ranch eventually," Quincy said as they walked. "What did you tell him?" "That it would be his someday if that's what he wanted, but not for a long time yet." Quincy squeezed her hand. "I'm not ready to slow down." "Good," Winifred said. "Neither am I." They paused at the corral fence, watching the horses graze in the twilight. The same view Winifred had seen from her bedroom window all those years ago, when she'd first arrived at the ranch as a frightened young woman unsure of her decision. "You remember the first time you brought me here?" she asked. "How could I forget? You looked so amazed by everything, like you'd never seen open sky before." "I hadn't, not really, not in years. I'd forgotten what freedom felt like." She turned to face him. "You gave me that freedom, Quincy. You gave me a life worth living." "We gave each other that," he replied. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You reminded me what it meant to really live." As the stars began to appear overhead, Winifred thought about all the years between that first meeting and this moment. The struggles and triumphs, the sorrows and joys, the daily choices that had woven their lives together into something beautiful and enduring. She'd expected to be a servant forever, invisible and unremarked. Instead, she'd become a partner, a wife, a mother, and a force in her own right. Quincy had seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself. He'd made her his equal, and in doing so, had made her his everything. And she had become his everything in return. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through years of shared work and shared dreams, of supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating successes together. Through the daily choice to see each other, to value each other, to love each other. Their children would inherit not just a successful ranch, but the example of what true partnership looked like. They'd see that love wasn't about domination or submission, but about 2 people walking side by side through life, each making the other stronger. As they walked back to the house, their home, Winifred felt profound gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought Quincy to the Pemberton house that day. For his courage in offering her a chance, and for her courage in taking it. The lights in the house glowed warm and welcoming. Through the windows, she could see her children, their children, going about their evening routines. Thomas was reading by the fire. Catherine was helping young Mary with her lessons. James was probably in the office, studying the accounts as he loved to do. This was her legacy. Not just children, though they were precious beyond measure, but a life built on mutual respect and love, a home where everyone was valued, a family bound together not by obligation but by genuine affection. Quincy opened the door for her, and as she stepped into the warmth and light, surrounded by the voices of the people she loved most in the world, Winifred knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The cowboy who'd made her his equal had given her the world. And in return, she'd given him a home filled with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness that came from two people choosing each other every day for the rest of their lives. As the years continued their steady march, Winifred and Quincy grew old together with grace and contentment. They eventually became grandparents when Thomas married a rancher's daughter from the neighboring property and started his own family. Catherine did become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property for the children of the workers. James went east for a few years to study business but returned to help manage the ranch's growing operations. And young Mary, true to everyone's predictions, charmed her way through life, eventually marrying a lawyer from Cheyenne and bringing her own children back to the ranch every summer. Through it all, Winifred and Quincy remained partners. They sat on the porch in their later years, watching their grandchildren play where their children once had, and marveled at the life they'd built together from unlikely beginnings. When they'd been married 30 years, their children threw them a celebration. The ranch was filled with people who'd been touched by their lives and their love. Old ranch hands, now retired but still part of the family. Townspeople from Jackson who'd watched the double become a model of fair dealing and good business. Neighbors and friends from across Wyoming. During the party, Catherine stood to make a toast. "To my parents," she said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd, "who taught me that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about choosing to see someone clearly and love them anyway. Who showed me that partnership means lifting each other up, not holding each other back. Who proved that where you start in life doesn't determine where you end up." Winifred, seated next to Quincy with his hand warm in hers, felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Happy tears, grateful tears, tears that acknowledged the miraculous journey from that day she'd beaten carpets at the Pemberton house to this moment, surrounded by love she'd helped create. Quincy leaned over and whispered, "Are you happy?" "I'm more than happy," Winifred whispered back. "I'm complete." And she was. The servant girl had become a matriarch, the invisible woman had become the heart of a family and a thriving ranch. She'd been made equal, and in that equality, she'd found not just love but purpose, not just security but joy. As the celebration continued around them, music and laughter filling the air, Winifred knew this was the happy ending she'd never dared to dream of. Not an ending at all, really, but a continuation of a life well lived, a love well tended, a partnership that had stood the test of time. She looked at Quincy, at his dear, familiar face lined with age but still handsome to her eyes, and squeezed his hand. He squeezed back, and in that simple gesture was everything they'd built together: trust, respect, partnership, love. The cowboy had made her his equal, and together they'd created something beautiful. Something that would outlast them in the children and grandchildren who carried forward the lessons they'd learned and the love they'd shared. And in the end, that was everything.